Hello everyone and welcome to Absolutely Quilting. My name is Stacy Lute and I am here creating in the studio today. It's kind of a rainy day outside here in Maryland, so I'm taking this as an opportunity to get in the studio and get some work done. I am moving a little slower than usual because I'm still in recovery from surgery. I had carpal tunnel surgery and a cyst removed on the back of my wrist. It's been a little over a week though, so I got quite a bit of my motion back, so I am getting in the studio making sure to get some sewing done. So I just thought I'd share with you what I'm working on today. I am currently working on a little Flying Geese panel, and this is part of a saturation project that I'm currently working on. I'm slowly working through this beautiful variant of hand-dyed fabrics. Aren't these gorgeous? And these are just a great example of saturation in a fabric. So I'm currently working on getting that finished, and I am using a paper piecing method for this just so I can get nice clean crisp points in my project. So I just thought I'd share with you guys how I am doing this project. I know a lot of people are very intimidated by paper piecing. Don't be. It can be a lot of fun. It can give you some great results with your piecing. So I just thought I'd share with you guys how I am paper piecing these. I did draft this in EQ8, so follow along while I show you how to do that. And the fabrics, just in case anyone's wondering, I will link the information below, is from a studio called Stone Row Studio. They're based out of PA. She does gorgeous hand-dyed fabrics. Definitely check her out. All right, so you ready to see some paper piecing? Let's get started. So I wanted to share two different ways of which you can approach your paper piecing. This is a fairly easy pattern. You know, there's not a whole lot of crazy things going on here. So I was able to determine ahead of time that a 3 7/8 inch square cut on the diagonal would be perfect for these pieces. Okay, you can kind of see the line through there. Okay. So I was able to determine that ahead of time because this is just triangles. It's fairly easy. And then this is a 4 1/2 inch finished square. And then I did let's see, it looks like I did possibly a 3 1/4. And those are going to fit perfectly here. Okay, so that is one way. This is, again, a fairly easy pattern. No crazy lines, no crazy things going on here. I know this is going to work. Now, let's say you have a pattern that's got a lot more going on here. I know one of the biggest things people say about paper piecing is it's wasteful. You waste a lot of fabric. Well, the way I learned how to paper piece, which was kind of revolutionary to me, was to take your pattern and cut it up. Cut out all the little pieces. Now, again, fortunately, in this pattern, we only have 2 pieces. We have our smaller piece here, and then our geese, which is here. So if we take this pattern and go ahead and cut it out, these are all the pieces for our pattern. Now remember, we need to add at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance to these. But by doing this, we can then take our pieces, and since we'll be stitching on these lines, the actual pieces are going to be, this is going to be the front of our block. So we want to make sure that we're using the correct side because that does come into play eventually. This particular pattern, it does not. But what I could do is I can take this piece and kind of guess about a 1/4 inch. Give yourself a little bit of a generous 1/4 inch just to be on the safe side. And now I have a piece that I know is going to fit because it's the right size, and we have a generous 1/4 inch that we know is going to fit perfectly in that space. So this is a little less wasteful. I know some people might literally just take a whole piece of fabric, put it on, and then trim the excess. Why do that? Start with the piece that you know that is the correct size. Give yourself a generous 1/4 inch. Then we're being a lot less wasteful with our fabric. Okay? All right, so those are the 2 methods in which I use. For some of the more complicated paper piecing methods, I will use this, definitely. Cut my pieces out and do it that way. Now, let's get started on this block. So I have my blocks here. I'm going to go ahead and give it a bit of a cut, not all the way to the seam line because we need that line when we do our final trim. So I'm just going to haphazardly cut this guy out. these two colors I've already done. These are my lowest saturation. These two are done, so I need to go ahead and cut my next two colors out, which are these guys right here. So let's go ahead and get those cut. Now that we have all of our pieces cut out and ready, we need to prep our foundation paper piecing. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go through and we are going to pre-crease all of these stitch lines. And just to know, I am using plain paper for my printer. You can get foundation paper piecing paper to do this, which is a little thinner and a little easier to tear. But the reason we're doing this is to just make it easier for removal once we are done all of our sewing, because that kind of helps to pre-crease it. That way we are ready to tear it off. And this also helps us with our trimming, because we are gonna take all these and we're gonna fold them back so that we can trim to have a 1/4 inch line. So that also helps with that. All right, let's finish up pre-creasing these. All right, so that is all of our lines creased. We are ready to go. So a foundation block pattern will typically have an order in which it has to go in. For this one, we're going to start down here. See this A1. So we're doing our darker colors on the bottom. So yes, you can use glue for this. I will just be pinning mine. And we are going to get it somewhat centered there. You can kind of hold it up to the light to make sure. Oh, and I'm on the wrong side of the paper. Very important. These are your stitch lines. So we have to put it on the back side of the paper. Trust me, you will make all the mistakes when you first start doing this. Been there, done that. So I'm just going to hold this up to the light, make sure I've got it covering everywhere that it needs to cover. All right. Then for my first piece here, I am just going to pin it on. Now remember, this is going to be the actual section you're going to see on the quilt. Okay. So I'm just going to pin that guy on, and now we're ready for our first piece. So I'm going to take one of my corner squares here, and we'll start on this side since we got the pin head going over here. All right, so that looks fairly center. Something you can do is just kind of fold it back as though there was a seam line there, just to make sure that everything is covered that you need covered. All right, and now I'm going to, for this first piece, I am going to throw a pin in there. Moving forward, I typically don't pin. All right, so now we're going to take this over to the machine. Just making sure it's right sides together. This is Moda Grunge, so it's got a bit of a texture or pattern to it. So just make sure your right sides are together. Now I'm going to take this over to the machine, And I'm going to flip it over and we are going to stitch right along that seam line right there. Okay, so here we have our first seam. I have stitched from here to here. This is our first triangle in our Flying Geese. And now we can come over here and remove our pins. So we'll see, there is our first seam, our first piece to our geese. Now you can press this with an iron, or you can just give it a little bit of a roll with a seam presser. I normally would iron it, but to save time here, we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, something I want to do is trim my first seam there down to a 1/4 inch seam. Although with the method that I'm using, you're going to get pretty darn close to a 1/4 inch without having to trim it. And look, that one is actually pretty spot on. I'm not even going to bother trimming it. But now for our next piece. So our next piece we're going to add is over here. This piece right here. I'm going to go ahead and pre-trim a 1/4 inch on that one so that when I add the piece, I already know where it needs to go. And that'll make more sense in just a moment here. So I'm going to trim off the excess. Oh, the dust. All right. So now we're ready to add our next piece. Make sure we have right sides together. And now we already know that that's going to be a 1/4 inch seam line, so I can just line it up with the edge of that seam. Flip it over, make sure that it's going all the way to that stitch line on the outside. I'm actually going to move it down just a hair. Something else to mention, I do decrease my stitch length to a 2.0 on the machine. That just helps to perforate the paper a little more. And because we are trimming a lot of things, that just helps to keep our stitches nice and tight so they don't potentially become unwrapped. All right, so there is our second piece. I'm going to go ahead and throw a pin in that. Again, pinning is not necessary, but at least when you're first learning this, I highly recommend it. Okay, so now we are going to stitch our second seam, which is this piece right here. Okay, and now we have our second piece added to our Flying Geese unit. Push that guy out, and there's our second piece. And most paper piecing patterns are going to come pre-numbered with the order in which you need to piece them. This one does with the EQ. It gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that is our first Flying Geese unit. Now we're going to work on our top Flying Geese unit. We're going to go ahead and pre-cut our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Oh, that tool's not going to work. This is the first I've ever been able to cut fabric, putting pressure on my rulers, so this is exciting. All right, so now we are ready for our top unit, which is the slightly lighter, less saturated fabric. And now we know this is our 1/4 inch seam line, so we're gonna match that up, center our fabric a bit. Just make sure when we turn it up that it's gonna go all the way to the edge, and that works just fine. All right, we're gonna pop a pin in there. Pinning was also very difficult right after my surgery. All right, now we're gonna flip it over and we're gonna do this seam right here, all the way from edge to edge. All right, so there is the top of our second Flying Geese unit. Same thing, we're gonna flip that right up. Look at how perfect that gets your points. All right, we'd give that a quick little press. All right, now we're going to repeat the process doing our corner bits. And there we have our last piece of our Flying Geese unit. I'm actually going to take this over to my iron and give it a good press before we do our trimming. Okay, so now you can see we have our completed unit. Our final steps are to trim it down and then to remove our paper. So I'm going to go ahead and trim it down using these dotted lines on the outside as my guide. And now our final step is to go ahead and remove our paper. And now this is when having the foundation paper piecing paper comes in handy, because it does rip a little easier than standard copy paper. But because we did some pre-creasing of our lines, that is going to help us to remove it easily. But always be careful, because you have now cut this. That's a live stitch, as I call it. So what I would generally do is put a little pressure on the area that we're starting, and then we are just going to gently peel that back. And this is where using that shorter stitch length helps, because it perforates our paper a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove all the rest of the pieces. And here we have our finished Flying Geese block. And I've just got a couple more of these to put together before I'm finished my sample, but I just want to share with you what I had going on in the studio today. Hopefully that might have helped you a little bit with your paper piecing and maybe made it a little less intimidated. Start with something simple and go from there. I promise you, once you get the hang of paper piecing, you're really going to enjoy it, because it does help to get nice, crisp, clean intersections of all of your points. That's it for today. Hope you have a wonderful day, and see you in the studio again.